This video is all about debunking some of the most common myths that people believe to be true that keep them from getting started with rental properties. These myths that people believe to be truths almost always come down to the exact same thing: taxes, tenants, and toilets. But these fears and these concerns are just not true. Hi y'all, thanks so much for stopping back by. If you're new here, then welcome. My name is Lori Livers and I'm glad to have you hang out for a few minutes. I know, it looks like livers, but it sounds like livers. It's a thing, everybody gets used to it. So again, my name is Lori Livers and I'm so glad to have you. On this channel, I talk a lot about passive income. Passive income has been the game-changing thing that has allowed me to shift the way I live my life. I now live my life the way I want to live my life and not the way I thought I had to live my life. And that has been an incredible experience for me. So I like to share that. Another thing I talk about a lot is planning and organizing, because for me, planning and organizing is what made all the rest of this possible. So I'm a total straight up planning and organizing nerd. And then every once in a while, we also talk about my YouTube experience, because outside of investing in real estate and passive income, I get asked about YouTube a lot. So every once in a while, we talk about my YouTube experience. This video is all about why it's just silly to let any of these common myths about the real estate investing world stop you from getting into it if it's something you want to do. Let's get started. Let's start with talking about what the big concerns are, what the big scary beliefs are about investing in real estate, specifically rental properties, because that's what I invest in, is rental properties. The first thing I hear is that the taxes are just too complicated. People think there is so much work to be done in handling the taxes for a rental property, and that by the time you get done handling all the work and putting forth all the effort to deal with the taxes, that you're not left with hardly any money, and it's probably just not worth it. That's not true. The next myth I hear all the time is that tenants are just a pain. People tell me, I don't want to chase rent payments, and these people are probably tearing up my property anyway. It's just not worth it. And that's not true either. Which leads me to the myth I call toilets. Okay, so not specifically toilets, but maintenance. People really commonly believe that maintaining a rental property is a real pain. I often hear people tell me, I'm just not handy and I don't have time for it and I don't want to deal with it. It's just not worth the effort. And let me tell you, you don't have to be handy. You don't have to spend any time on it. And it doesn't have to be a whole lot of effort. None of that is true either. If you could take just a second and click that like button down below for me, I'd really appreciate it. Now, let's get into why none of this stuff is true. Let's start with taxes. And I have to start with taxes by telling you, I am not a tax professional. I left my accounting career behind for a reason, because I don't want to deal with this crap. So, first and foremost, you need to know that I am not a tax professional, and I would hope that you would seek out your own professional tax information for yourself. But with that being said, let me tell you why I don't believe that tax concern, that tax myth, is true at all. We are living in a day and age where most people can really easily handle their own taxes online year after year after year. Tax prep software has become more and more sophisticated, and at the same time, it's become much more simple for the average person to use. So what that means to a potential real estate investor is that all the most popular, most common tax softwares that you see on the market are perfectly capable of handling rental property tax situations. But if you're not somebody that wants to do this yourself, don't. There is actually an entire industry of people out there waiting for you to give them a call because they want to do your taxes for you. It's going to cost you a few $100s, but I promise you they're going to save you more than just a few $100s in paying your income taxes. And their fees in most circumstances are completely tax deductible, or at least I think it's completely tax deductible. Verify that for yourself. That's just my opinion. I am not a tax professional. A significant thing to know when we're talking about taxes with rental properties, there's really two kinds of taxes that we talk about most, and those are going to be property taxes and income taxes. Now, you're not paying your property taxes. Your renters are paying your property taxes, you're collecting it in the rent, and then you're using that money to pay the property taxes. So you're not paying the property. And the thing to know about the income taxes is that the government officials in the United States, where I live and I invest, are incredibly, very heavily invested in real estate. That's right. The people that decide what our tax laws and tax code are going to be are really heavily invested in real estate. So they wrote those tax laws and put those laws in place in order to protect their own best interest. And for me, I personally don't have a problem taking advantage of that same best interest. They actually provided it for themselves, but hey, it works for me too. So the tax advantages of owning a rental property are really vast. There are a ton of tax advantages to owning rental properties. So before you decide it's something that is a deal breaker for you, that keeps you out of ever even getting into investing in real estate, talk to a tax professional. Find out how great of a situation it can create for you. Don't let that be a deal breaker for you. So that tax myth that you can't invest in real estate without it being so expensive tax-wise is completely debunked. The next myth we're talking about is all about tenants. And all of us have heard the tenant horror stories. But let me promise you, there is a way to mitigate and reduce your likelihood of ever having experienced any of these horror stories for yourself. Very simply, if you are proactive in your tenant screening process up front, then you are much more likely to get a good quality tenant living in your house. And when you spend the time properly screening for your tenant and then setting the right expectations with your tenant when they move in, you are so much less likely to experience any tenant issues throughout the term that they live in your house. The way I set these expectations is with light bulbs. I will link my rent video right here, so if you want to check that out and see the process I use to screen my tenants, you might find that interesting. Know that spending some time up front screening your tenants before you ever move anybody into your house is very well worth your time. But if you don't want to, you don't have to. There's an entire industry of property managers that are just waiting for you to give them a call because they want to manage your property. They want to choose your tenants. They want to talk to your tenants. They want to chase your rent. They want to handle all of these things for you. So if this is something that you just think, I absolutely cannot handle this, and I will not get into investing in rental properties because I've heard these tenant horror stories, know that there are property managers out there that will deal with all of this for you. So that does not exist in your world unless you choose to let it exist in your world, because you have options. So that myth that it is so hard to work with tenants is really debunked as well. That's simply just not true. Now, the last myth that I want to talk to you about today is the myth around toilets, or, more accurately, maintenance. People believe that the maintenance is just going to be a nightmare and they don't want to have to deal with it. They feel like they're not handy enough, they're too busy, whatever the reason, they just don't want to have to deal with it. And I get it. For me, this one is a little bit true because I'm with you. I don't want to have to deal with it either. I don't want a phone call in the middle of the night saying the toilet is overflowing. And very luckily for me, to this point, I haven't gotten that phone call. I believe that I am being very proactive in reducing these calls coming my way right up front in my rehab process. I make sure all the systems of my house are in a very good working order before I ever even consider looking for a tenant to move into that house. So I think this is my first step to not being bothered with a lot of maintenance issues, because I make sure my house is in a great condition before I even place a tenant in the house. The other thing I do that I think is also very proactive in preventing these types of calls coming my way is that I very clearly set expectations with my tenants when they first move into the house. I let them know what things I will be responsible for, and more importantly, what things they will be responsible for. So they're not calling me because the light burned out in the kitchen. I don't get those phone calls because those expectations are very clearly set, very clearly defined, and we don't have a problem. And then the last thing I do to make sure that I am not bothered by these situations and these circumstances that could possibly come up is that I have built a solid team. And on my team, I have a couple plumbers. And on my team, I have a couple of electricians. And on my team, I have a couple of HVAC people. My thought is that if something comes up and it needs to be handled right away, it's going to be either an HVAC issue, an electrical issue, or a plumbing issue. And the reason I have more than one of each of these tradespeople on my team is so that I can easily get in touch with somebody who can go out and deal with whatever the situation might be as soon as possible. Now, my process for doing this, because I do self-manage my properties, is pretty simple. If my tenant texts me and says, hey, the AC is not cooling, I'm like, okay, let me get on that. That's a valid concern. Let me get on that right away. That is something I need to be responsible for. That's not their responsibility. I then just text one of my AC guys and tell him I have an issue. Is this something you can deal with? Do you have time in your schedule? If he says yes, then great. I connect him with my tenant. They arrange for him to come out and visit. and we deal with it. If he says no, that's okay. It's not a big deal. That's why I have more than one HVAC person on my contact list, so I can keep going down the list until I find an HVAC person that can go out in a reasonable amount of time and deal with that issue. Now, I do this because I do still self-manage my properties. There is a time coming in my future where I will not even take these calls. I will be a completely hands-off investor. I will hire that property manager that is going to screen those tenants and is going to take any of those maintenance calls that come along in that process. So the myth around maintenance issues in a rental property being complicated and time-consuming and expensive is just generally not true. If you spend the time up front properly rehabbing that house and you resolve any issues while they're still small, then they don't get big and expensive and they don't become a bigger problem than what they need to be. So in my world, the myth that all of these things are so difficult and so hard to deal with is just simply not true. So that's it. Taxes, tenants, and toilets are the most common concerns I hear from people who are on the fence about getting into real estate investing. They say, I can't do this. I don't want to deal with these things. If you do this right and you get started the right way, doing the right things, then everything after that is almost completely passive income-wise. Now, of course, this is all kind of dependent on doing the right things first, getting started on the right foot. So I'm going to put my rehab video right up here and I'm going to wait for you over there. I want you to watch the rehab video next, because in that video, I'll explain to you just how to go about setting that budget and getting started in the right way so that none of these things have to be true for you either. I'll be waiting for you over there in that rehab video, so go ahead and click it. And until then, bye y'all.